because, and in the weeks and months since then, our partners have noticed longer lead times, fewer raw resources, and other elements of the supply chain that are at risk, creating problems for election officials who are planning for primary season now and the midterm election in November. I'd like to hand it off to the co-chair of our subsector working group, Jim Suver, if I may, sir, who has some details about the white paper that the SEC authored and points specifically at 8 different threat vectors or risks to the paper ballot and envelope supply chain. And thank you again, sir, for having us today.
Ranking Member Davis, Commissioner McCormick, colleagues and friends, my name is Jim Suver. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Runback Election Systems. And I am with Jeff Ellington, our President and CEO of Runback as well. What Mr. Voloshin referred to was the ballot paper supply chain risk management artifact that we did produce from the EI-SCC Council. And those 8 different asset vectors are what we highlighted, and we also have many risk mitigations that we commented on that. Threats to those asset vectors and also the risk mitigation suggestions. So I won't go into a lot of detail on that. There's a lot of high-level issues we obviously need to address here.
Other industry representatives want to give some feedback, right?
Yeah, thank you, Representative, for bringing us together today. We're a smaller production facility than Runback, for instance, but we produce ballots out of our Detroit location for about 25% of the state of Michigan. Been doing it for 30 years. And normally we would begin to buy our paper for election for this year about now. But because of what we saw with supply chain issues last year, we actually started trying to get allocations and commitments for paper beginning last August or so. And thought we had them. They got a little fuzzy, so we ended up just putting purchase orders in and said, we'll buy the paper, take delivery as soon as you can deliver it. We think we've got the commitments for the paper we need for the midterm elections. It's not on my floor yet, so I still lose a little bit of sleep over that. Another challenging issue on that is that I do not know what I will be paying for that paper until it hits my warehouse. When the truck pulls up to the dock is when the mills will tell me what I'm going to pay for that paper when it arrives. So, and we've got multi-year contracts with clerks around the state of Michigan. So it's not my primary focus on the pricing. The delivery and having the paper is. The other issue I hear from my clerks in Michigan is that, and from the envelope manufacturers that we work with on a daily basis, paper availability for them to make envelopes is very challenging, and we're worried about them having enough envelopes to mail the ballots that we will produce for them. So I hope we can come to a solution, and I appreciate your efforts.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate what the industry is doing to try and address this issue in a time where, as we all know, there might not be any solution forthcoming to some of our supply chain issues that could impact the short term. But long term, that's why I'm so interested in having this discussion. Any other printing industry folks, any other industry folks want to lay out any more issues with what you're experiencing right now with the supply chain issues? And you mentioned something too, Brad, about you don't know what the cost is. Are we seeing an increase in those input costs for the paper that's coming from the mills?
Yeah, so thank you very much for organizing this. My name is Jeff Ellington, as Jim said. I'm President and CEO of Runback Collections. But to talk about cost, we've seen in the last couple of years costs go about 40% just on the paper stuff. So that's both envelopes, the I-voted stickers, it's the ballots, it's the instruction sheets. That 40% is across all types of paper. So it's putting a lot of stress on the counties, who are always underfunded when it comes to elections, a lot of stress on the supply chain to keep up with everything. And so we, much like Brad, we started planning our paper last August. We have commitments, and that's a key word in this, because the commitments are there, but the mills are trying to keep on, right? They've had COVID outbreaks, they've had to shut down at times. So until it's on the floor, there's that concern that it just won't show up. And so even though there are other commitments for envelopes, for paper, we're only in March. We got a long way to go to get to November and keep pushing that forward. Out of our office in Phoenix, we mailed about 20% of the ballots for the 2020 general election. So there's a lot that goes through there. There's a lot that goes across the country. So it's not just getting that paper, it's getting the truck drivers, having truckers show up to fill that commitment. We've had trucks committed and then the driver no shows. It gets a more profitable run somewhere else. So there's a lot of complicated processes to this whole effort to get an election law.
Well, I had a conversation with our kitchen cabinets, Republican secretaries of state yesterday, and it was good to find out that many of them have already started to pre-plan for this and have begun to stockpile some of their election paper needs. And that's something too that I think I'd like to hear from some of our elected officials. I know we have a few that are on Zoom with us, and we also have Paige here from the National Association of Counties from NACO. But I'd love to hear their perspective on, you've heard from the industry representatives about supply chain issues as vendors, and as part of the industry that you all rely upon to run elections. What, from your perspective, can we look out for? Paige, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member. My name is Paige Malario. I'm an Associate Legislative Director with NACO. We serve all 3,069 counties across the nation, as well as nearly 40,000 elected county officials and 3.9 million county employees. Since counties are typically administered and funded fund our elections, one of our main priorities this year is to maintain election integrity and enhance election security. So not only is this paper ballot shortage impacting the accessibility to paper, but there are new increased costs to paper, as my colleague said over there. That puts an additional burden on counties with already small budgets for elections. I'm joined today by Ricky Hatch, who is our chair to our NACO's election subcommittee. And so if I could pass it over to Ricky, he can talk more about what this looks like on the ground.
Ricky, good to see you again from Weber County, Utah. Don't say Weber. Weber County, Utah. And clearly, NACO must be hard up if you chose Ricky to be your chair this year. Now, Ricky and I know each other. Great guy, and glad to have you. Ricky?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Really appreciate the invitation, and it's nice to see you as well. I'm Ricky Hatch. I'm the Weber County Clerk Auditor. I'm a member of the EAC Board of Advisors, the chair of the Election Subcommittee for the National Association of Counties, and I'm one of the founding members of the Government Coordinating Council that was mentioned earlier as well. So local election administrators, we're just not experts in election law and election administration, but we're also cybersecurity experts, auditors, event planners, and logistical specialists. And I'll be honest, we're a little paranoid. We generally have backup plans for our backup plans. We are so careful in planning for these critical events called elections. And the past couple of years, frankly, have been quite challenging, and local election officials have stepped up in huge and innovative ways to address these unique and unpredictable situations. I've checked with a lot of my counterparts across the country, and I'm hearing that the vote by mail clerks and election officials, as well as the larger election officials, we've ordered much earlier than normal our paper supplies. But I do have concerns that the smaller local election officials aren't aware, and that's, by smaller, I mean about 70% of all election officials across the country have fewer than 25,000 voters in their jurisdictions. My concern is that they're just not aware of the situation, and they don't have the pull with the suppliers because they're so small. The larger counties may have a better pull and more influence. So we have to figure out how best to reach them. Also, cost is also and always a concern for election officials. As an example, in 2020, Weber County, we actually, our ballots are printed out of state and then trucked into the state before they are mailed on a secure GPS tracked truck. And those, the cost of that trucking alone tripled for Weber County just for 2020 because of the shortage and challenges there. And so it's a complex situation. And thank you so much for bringing this up. I really appreciate this. And it's badly needed across the country. So thank you.
Paige, do you have any other comments? Okay, great. Ricky, great to see you again. Hope to be back in Weber County again soon. And keep my good friend Blake Moore. Okay.
He's an awesome guy. Thank you.
He's mediocre. We have a lot of fun. We have some other election administrators with us today. I know Tammy Smith from Wilson County, Tennessee. Tammy, you want to give your perspective on what you're seeing in Tennessee when it comes to addressing this issue and what you foresee happening as we move into the primary season, the general election season?
First off, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's an honor to be part of this group. I have a little bit different perspective than Ricky because in Tennessee, we are not a vote by mail. We do most of our voting in person. But I will say from that perspective, we still use a lot of paper. For example, I had trouble getting paper for our wallet cards when redistricting is taking place. So I had to have an alternative plan for that. So, and it's by state law, we have to send everyone a new voter card. So it trickles down all the way down to even things like that. I voted stickers, envelopes. The state has done a really good job on giving us a good supply of envelopes if we all use the same one for the vote by mail. But from a perspective of just because we're not a vote by mail state, it doesn't mean that we're not affected because, you know, as Ricky stated, cost is a huge issue for us. We have limited budgets. Most of our jurisdictions in Tennessee are very small. Probably 80% of our jurisdictions are 2-people offices. And so you can imagine they're small offices and their budgets are very low. So when these types of things come up, it's going to hit all of us in different ways. And I do have the concern that Ricky mentioned that, you know, this is, we have backups for everything. Every single thing that we do, we have redundancies for. But this is one, it's a little bit different because we're really going to have to rely on our vendor heavily. And thankfully, I have a really good vendor for our voting equipment. And so I feel pretty good there. And I tend to order early. I have enough to get through 2 elections or maybe even the whole year with ballots, but I'm not sure every jurisdiction has done that because of resources and money. So, and we do a lot of ballot marking devices. So just because we're not doing full-face ballots doesn't mean that it's not affecting us because those are still our ballots. So there are a lot of different issues here. So I'm really glad that we're having this discussion and hopefully can come up with some solutions. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tammy. Great to see you again. I know we have Shelley Jackson there. I'm going to hold on you real quick, Shelley. I want to go to Amy Cohen real quick. And they said she's got to leave a little bit sooner than others. And I want to make sure that we hear from you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's an honor to be here. This is my first in-person event in a very long time, so it's nice to see humans. I am the executive director of the National Association of State Election Directors. My members are in all 50 states, DC, and the 5 U.S. territories, so I cover a lot of ground and I hear a lot from my members. Tammy mentioned that elections are a really paper-driven process, and I think that is an incredibly important thing to keep in mind because we are already seeing the impacts of this supply chain challenges, not just on ballots, but on other kinds of paper, other forms, voter registration forms. For example, Texas was very public in saying that they had a difficult time getting enough paper to print their voter registration forms in advance of their primaries. Other forms, absentee ballot requests, voter guides, pocket cards, things like that. And a thing to keep in mind is we are seeing state legislatures make changes to forms. And as they make changes to forms, that means that backstop doesn't meet the need anymore. And that's a challenge for election officials who do often stock up on things so that they have extra. At the state level, I am hearing from states who are having to delay their confirmation card mailings, or are hearing from their local election officials that they're not able to meet deadlines for required state deadlines because they can't get postcards and they can't get paper for that kind of thing. Or if they can get paper, they can't get as much paper as they would want. And then we see things like design suffering. So you're cramming a lot of information into a relatively short, small space, which can cause problems. So this is something that the states are paying very close attention to, working closely with their print vendors. There's a lot of, among NASA, we're a very collaborative bunch. And so people are trying to support each other and share, in-state vendors who have been able to meet deadlines for confirmation cards and other things like that. But it's a real challenge, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because the primaries are going to exacerbate any problem that we anticipate for November. In November, everybody is going to need everything on essentially the same time frame. With the primaries, obviously, we have it spread out a little bit longer. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Amy. And I want to get to Shelley too. And now it's very interesting to hear this whole perspective. And that's why we wanted to get everybody in this whole process together today. Because again, I don't know what the final solution is going to be, but in the end, it's about awareness. And Shelley is the deputy state elections director in the state of Utah. And I mean, I want you to offer whatever comments you have prepared, but also can you kind of give us a perspective on just the type of paper that's required for use in machines that are in Utah? That I was there just a few months ago and saw. So, and any perspective on what you're witnessing now too, Shelley?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Ranking Member Davis. Yes, I'm Shelley Jackson, Deputy Director of Elections in Utah. So the type of paper it's a thicker type of paper. It's not just your copy paper that you would go and buy. And the vendors like Runbeck that's in the room, they buy it on giant rolls, the size of the room that you're in. They're huge. So it's not just going out and buying regular office paper. Just to echo some of the comments that Ricky Hatch said, I'm not as worried about the counties and jurisdictions that are relying on, a Runbeck type print house, but I am worried about the vendors or the counties who are relying on smaller vendors or who print their own ballots. So yeah, I'm not sure they're aware of all this problem. So it definitely is a specialized paper.
You got any other comments about what you're seeing from your local election officials, especially the smaller, more rural ones in the state?
I think some of them are blissfully unaware. We've been trying to raise awareness of the situation. So unfortunately, I think that there's just not a lot of awareness of this.
I'm sure they're all watching C-SPAN today, so they will know now because of all of you being here. Thank you very much, Shelley.
Thank you.
We have the Election Assistance Commission, and Election Assistance Commission does a great job in making sure that federal dollars are able to be accessed by our local election administrators, make sure that the certification processes are in place. Christie Mccormick is one of the election assistance commissioners. And Christie, I know you've got a good perspective about what you see happening out there in the nation. You want to address any of the issues that some of the election officials brought up and the industry reps?
Yeah, sure. Christie Mccormick from the Election Assistance Commission. Thank you, Congressman Davis, for inviting me today. We are very concerned about this issue. We've been hearing from local and state election officials across the country on the issues that they've been dealing with. One of the missions of the Election Assistance Commission is to be a clearinghouse for information and to get assistance out to the local and state election officials who are the ones who are running the elections. So it's our hope that we can get some mitigation strategies out to election officials. We did recently form a new federal Assistance Committee, a FACA, made up of local election officials, 2 election officials from each state, local election officials who serve in their leadership of their organizations in their states. And we hope to use that organization to push down, to get some of this information down to the lower levels of people who might not be aware of the issue yet, especially the smaller jurisdictions. We've already placed the white paper from the SEC on our website, and I've done a video. We'll probably do some more about that. I think it's important that officials are planning ahead. Obviously, it's super early, talking to their funding sources because of the increase in costs. I'm sure a lot of the jurisdictions don't have contingency budgets for 40% increases in costs for paper. To look at their plan, can they be flexible? Do they need to have colored envelopes? I mean, part of the problem that we've seen is that we have increased mail ballots over the last couple of years because of the pandemic. Mail ballots use more paper. They use more envelopes. They're more paper heavy than in person. And so envelopes are a huge issue. Are the election officials using custom envelopes? Can they go to standard envelopes? Just ways that they can be flexible, not use colored envelopes, whatever they can do to mitigate the issue. And we're going to be collecting those strategies and pushing them out to the local election officials through our LLC.
Christie, it's great to see you again.
You too.
Thanks for the work that you do. We will be talking, as we usually do,
Absolutely.
about a lot of election issues. You mentioned awareness, and I think today we all have to become aware of what are the shortcomings that the printing industry is facing right now. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bowers to offer any comments and give us a perspective from the Printing Alliance.
Thank you, Ranking Member. So I'd just like to make a couple of just broad comments in terms of what we're saying. The paper shortage is acute across everything that's going on in the industry. And this is really, this is not a situation that it appears will be resolved in and of its own self over the next couple of years. We have a history of what's happened with paper production capacity over the last number of years. We've had mills closing, converting to other types of products that are more profitable for those mills, which makes sense. This is what you would do if you were running a business. But the amount of capacity being taken offline in this particular area is staggering. So, something in the neighborhood of 2.5 million tons of this type of paper being taken off the market in North American production over the last 5 years. That's a pretty staggering amount. So then what you've had because of COVID is you've had the demand side has also shifted. So what's happened there is packages and shipping and so on and so forth, that has taken precedent. I think Amazon and everybody going online to buy versus going out and picking stuff up at a brick and mortar place. So books, good for the book printers because books went up 13% in terms of their production last year alone. So what this has done though is it's constrained the amount of paper that's available. So this is really not something, we don't think demand is going to shift back now that we're getting out of COVID. It's not going to shift back to where it was. Once you take a mill offline, you're not putting it back online. So we have somewhat of a long-term problem that we have to face. So the question is, how do we address this moving forward, specifically for this segment? How do we prioritize the shipments in order to make sure that those things that are necessary for the running of elections are available at the time. So this is, again, apart from the larger economic woes of the printing industry in terms of supply chain, this particular issue is very acute this year. And I think it's going to be similar in the next few elections. I just don't think it's going to be.
So supply and demand, obviously, and darn COVID, too many people are reading more books. Wow, good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we originally hoped to have some folks here from the American Forestry and Paper Association, but they weren't able to make it today. I'd love to hear their perspective on the supply. But really, we've identified some issues that our local election administrators are facing. We've seen it and heard from Ms. McCormick that this is a nationwide problem. We heard from our shippers, we heard from our printers. What are the solutions? And what should be our next step? And I'll turn it over to anybody who wants to answer. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. I'm not in favor of government getting involved in my business a whole lot. I'd rather have it stay out of the way and let me do my thing. But I think at this point in time, because of the unique situation that we find ourselves in, particularly this year, I don't know if there's a way that those of us that are doing this business and have been doing this business can get some sort of certification or designation, and then can the government, give us some sort of priority basis of, getting the material we need, to get us through. I'm not, I don't know what the other solution is, but it's a thought. Because otherwise people just start hoarding paper, there needs to be a system in place that would try to monitor this whole thing, but that might be one possible solution. I'm not sure where else to go with it. Thank you.
Is there a certification process for those printers who print election materials to identify? It's be careful what you ask for when you ask for a federal solution. And that's what gave us that dastardly EAC over there. But in the end, how would the federal government identify that process? So,
sir, if I could build on his comments, elections infrastructure are critical infrastructure, and one of the 16 areas that CISA and others monitor and support. One suggestion would be to somehow incentivize paper manufacturers and mills to prioritize election materials. It's not just every even year that there's a major election. There are thousands of elections going on all year long that paper ballot printers and envelope suppliers deal with. If there was some way to incentivize that portion of this critical infrastructure to prioritize election materials, that might be a solution. One other suggestion that I'm sure you've heard before is lawmakers providing regular recurring funding to election officials to purchase cybersecurity services, training for their staff, and be able to budget for election materials like ballots and envelopes, regular recurring funding every year instead of a surge every 10 years might help election officials and all the stakeholders involved budget better for times like these.
I also want to offer their perspective.
Yeah, to kind of add on to what these guys have already said, and to touch on some of the comments from folks on Zoom, we have a lot of new election officials. Since 16, a lot of people have retired, quit. So they're blissfully unaware because they're unaware, right? They've got so much coming at them. And two people offices, sometimes they also do marriage licenses, titles, and they're not just focused on elections. So they're trying to catch up. We've been communicating to our customers about this problem since December, and we've annoyed some of them. They're like, we can't think about November because we have these other things going on earlier in the year. And I think the certification, to answer your question, there are some states that require some level of certification. The tabulation vendors request that the printers do basically a test deck, and then they approve that they're printed well enough that the tabulation vendors can read them. But there is a lot of this is around awareness because people are so busy. Some states and counties are still working from home, so they're not even back in their offices where they're mixing with folks. So awareness is the number one thing we can get out there. Is get this message out that, hey, start planning. States have certain laws on when the ballot artwork, or I'm sorry, the envelope artwork can be finalized. So we can't even order and get those envelopes printed yet because they haven't met their deadlines to even to do that step. So there's a lot around awareness that needs to happen.
This is exactly why we're doing this today. And we hope that the media coverage that this roundtable is getting will bring that awareness. I want every election official in and around my district to understand that they need to contact their vendor immediately to see if they're going to run into a shortage. Once you explain a multitasking, what we call a county clerk in the state of Illinois is exactly who I'm most concerned about in getting the information that we're discussing here today out to. Does anybody else have any perspective? Mr. Bowers?
Just wanted to add on just to give this a little bit of scope in terms of how large this is in terms of the demand for these types of products. So for example, I believe, I'm not sure, Ms. McCormick may know better, but about 90 million mail-in ballots, I think, in the last election cycle. So, and if each one took 3 envelopes, that's 270 million envelopes. But the envelope production in this country is between 100 and 125 billion envelopes a year. So we're talking about a very, very small percentage. So really just a mechanism to handle a very small percentage should not be a burden or an economic loss for those who see it. So if it can be prioritized, that's probably the best way to handle it. But it is a small amount of paper we're talking about. So just perspective.
Yes, thank you. The mills and the paper manufacturers are our partners. You asked what's the solution, and we are in partnership with them. So we have to, I believe, a solution, one other solution that another to add on to what has been put forward is to ask them what do they need to help us. Since they are our partners in this, they need to be part of this solution. They're willing to be part of the solution. I know that we know they are. We just need to reach out to them and ask their perspective of what they need to help relieve this issue for us.
Sure, and we will do that, and hopefully be able to sit down with them and get their perspective after hearing from each of you about your perspective in this entire, what I would consider the election supply chain. And all of you play a very integral role in that process. And again, I think it's imperative that we address issues like this right now because of what we've seen over the last few election cycles where too many Americans don't believe the process is without flaws. There's always flaws in any process, but as we see here throughout this entire electoral process supply chain, we try to limit those flaws. We want everybody to have faith in our election process. And having shortages of a supply is something that we ought to be able to address as Americans before it becomes a major issue. So awareness, prioritization, getting the perspective from the paper mill industry, your partners, those are great suggestions. What else does anybody think that we might have missed in this debate and discussion? Christie?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, it might be that the elections industry is only a small amount compared to the rest of the paper usage in the country. But elections are time sensitive. So we can't move the election dates. Some of the other industries can be more flexible than we can. We have to plan ahead. We have to make sure all elections have to be perfect as they can be. But this year especially, we need to make sure that things are proofed correctly so that we aren't making mistakes and needing last minute supplies of paper to fix mistakes. There's going to be a lot of burden on election officials to make sure things are extra perfect this year because we don't have the ability to just call up our supplier or print vendor and say, can you do another one of something? So, yes, we might be a small slice of the paper usage, but it's obviously a very, very important slice. And we don't have, time. Time is one thing we can't get back in the elections world.
Thank you. I think a couple points that some of you touched on that's really important for the movement of goods is sort of that communication on the front end and knowing what's going to be expected when, how best to help move those goods when needed, so that forecasting can always be helpful to create. And we're seeing this across the supply chain just to create and utilize the capacity that's there. I know, we have a lot of capacity now, but ready to move. But if things aren't ready to move from the truckers or the other areas, then we can't move them. I would say just from an infrastructure perspective, generally, there's a lot of money from that. The infrastructure bill that's going out, we'll see how that goes. But I will note that, and I know we're working on that, but I would note that time is money when it comes to infrastructure and things that are going to improve the efficiency, safety, resiliency of supply chain. So to the extent, and I know this is something that's important to you, Ranking Member Davis, is
permitting reform and seeing how much you can move those projects forward without losing necessary reviews, but to streamline that process to get those dollars in the ground, get the shovels in the ground, and move those infrastructure projects quickly.
I wrote an editorial about this whole topic, and it got picked up in the Detroit Free Press a week or so ago. And one of the news stations, the television stations in Detroit, interviewed me earlier this week about the thing. And I got a lot of feedback from people that read the editorial and whatnot, that they were like, well, I knew there were supply chain issues about, stuff, but I had no idea. This is horrendous. I think whatever each and every one of us can do to raise that profile of the issue itself is beneficial. And, so it needs a lot more publicity than it's gotten so far. And this is a great start. And I think we all have to go back home and do that much more.
Well, and again, I agree with you. And I think I'm glad we brought up something earlier about labor issues, workforce issues. That directly impacts your ability to get the products that could be at paper mills, could be printed from point A to point B. The labor issues that we're facing across all industries, and frankly, I think even our election administrators will tell you there's issues with having people work the polls on election day. So does anybody want to have any additional comments on any suggestions, any best practices that you or your industries or your offices have utilized to really address that shortage of actual workforce? I'd be interested in hearing what is working right now, if anything. Any of our election administrators want to tackle that?
In Wilson County, I will say that your question was what's working with poll officials. Is that correct?
Yeah, are you having a problem getting people to actually work the polls as part of your process in the election?
I think the key for us, we've had really good success with our poll officials, and we have a really good group of core workers, but I invest heavily in my poll workers. So they're not just working from one election to the next. They're hearing from me on a regular basis. They are connected with our office. They are a part of our team. They are invited to, we do something called Election Institute, where we inform the public, advocacy groups, anyone who wants to learn what we do behind the scenes to get ready for elections. We invite all of these people every time we do this, poll officials included. So they really are a big part of our team. And so I have been very fortunate in Wilson County to not have a poll worker shortage, but I know many jurisdictions do have that issue. Tennessee has done something really good though, where we did we've done a massive marketing campaign for poll officials. In 2020, they started this, and they have a poll worker portal that they can go onto and sign up to be a poll worker. And they've come up with a marketing campaign to encourage that. So Tennessee has done a fabulous job, but I know other jurisdictions across the country do have those issues.
Ricky, are you experiencing any of those issues in Weber County?
We're a little different because our in-person voting, so few people come, and we have a nice core group of poll workers that we rely on year after year. Tammy is exactly right. If you can invest in them and keep them, it's fantastic. Things that we've done is partnering with local universities. We also partnered with local high schools. In Utah, we got a bill passed that allows a certain percentage of poll workers to be 16 and 17-year-olds who are pre-registered to vote, but they can serve as a poll worker before they can actually vote. That has been very helpful. But I know in non-vote by mail jurisdictions, it is a challenge, especially given the caustic environment right now. It's a little scary to be an elections worker. We've lost 1/3 of our county clerks in Utah in the past 2 years. Much of that is due to the caustic environment and the questions of integrity and sometimes our parentage because of people who just simply don't trust the process anymore because of an outcome that they didn't like. So it's a challenge, and we're working on that, and it's getting better. And we appreciate the efforts both back in Washington as well as from the Department of Justice on providing protections for election workers and election judges. That is helpful, but it's going to be it's going to be a long haul to try and regain the trust and the comfort level of that. Being an election worker is an honor, and it's an honorable profession.
It is an honorable profession, and I appreciate both of the perspectives. It is a caustic environment out there right now. And I think there's more interest in learning about the electoral process now more than we've seen in a very long time. And my suggestion always is to somebody who wants to talk about the electoral process in my home state of Illinois or my local counties, I want them to become a poll worker, understand the process, understand the redundancies, understand what happens before you are able to go in and cast that ballot. And it's that educational opportunity that I think will allow more and more Americans to have faith in our elections. Because I do believe we have the freest and fairest elections in the world. And this is an opportunity for us to bring awareness to a problem that could be impending. And frankly, some of the suggestions out here in Washington will clearly exacerbate the paper shortage problem that we have right now. HR 1, if passed, would have put forth even more paper usage requirements. And that's something that I think we need to be keenly aware of around this table. What type of impact would that have? And part of our solutions has to be listening. And I'm really honored to have been able to listen to each of you about your suggestions, what we can do to bring awareness to this problem, what we can do to prioritize election materials, how can that fit into our suppliers, and the timing that you would need to get those products from point A to point B. Christie, I really appreciate your perspective on the timing issues that all election administrators have to deal with. We do have deadlines in this business. I know, because my name's on that piece of paper. And there is a deadline. And that deadline is prior to election day, and then hopefully those results are in as quickly as possible. I want to kind of round this out. I don't want to keep everybody here, but I would like to have anyone have an opportunity to offer any closing comments. Again, we will reach out to the paper industry and work with them and get their perspective as a partner, as you said, Jim. So does anybody want to offer any closing comments or bring up any issue that we might not have addressed that we think could be helpful in this discussion? Chris?
Yes, sir. The Sector Coordinating Council, in partnership with the Government Coordinating Council made up of EAC, CISA, and election officials, we are problem solvers. In the months before the pandemic and through the 2020 election, the GCC SEC partnership developed actionable materials for election officials across the country to be able to utilize to support voting during the pandemic. I believe this partnership will continue to solve problems as it applies to the paper ballot shortage and other supply chain risk management issues. Your continued support, the support of House Admin, will enable us to continue to work together and solve these problems. So I am worried, but it's not, I don't believe it's a crisis point yet. We're attacking this early enough that I think we can fix it. And thank you.
Thank you. And that's exactly why we're doing this today. But this is a Republican House Administration Roundtable. This is an issue that I will tell each and every one of you and anyone viewing, this will be an issue that the majority will likely want to have a hearing on, but I'm afraid it might be too late by that time, which is why we wanted to have this process begin now. And I don't want it to become a crisis. And I think everybody's involvement today, we can go out and begin ringing the bell that something needs to be addressed and hopefully avoid that hearing process that I think is inevitable right now as we look ahead to the next election. So anybody else want to offer any closing
Yeah,
comments?
Just
Jeff?
one thing on the timeline. For the November election, everything has to be in place by the first week of September. So just call it the end of August, right? Envelopes, paper stock, all that has to be ready, especially for vote by mail states. So the timeline isn't November, right? It's not that election day. We're really talking, it has to be in place and ready to go by August, or late August. And that's really, so then you back up from there on that timeline. So there's not a lot of time to get everything in place for November, even though it feels like it's a long way off right now. So I just want to emphasize that really August is everything needs to be ready by then.
Yeah. I'll add that redistricting is also going to impact this. That has something we haven't discussed, but we're still in the midst of deciding lines, and we can't print ballots until we know where people are voting from. So that is going to add another wrinkle to this issue. Obviously, the sooner we get redistricting in place, the better for election officials. So the EAC is going to do everything we can to assist local election officials, raise awareness, provide any kind of mitigation strategies we can, collect mitigation strategies. Happy to listen and take emails from people who have suggestions that we can push out. And we'll be communicating with the election officials as best we can.
Anyone else want to offer any closing comments? Listen, again, thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to thank you again for having this roundtable this morning. This is an issue that our members are very concerned about and aware about. But I would just add, in addition, kind of to piggyback on what Ricky said, I do think addressing threats to election workers definitely needs to also be addressed to kind of solve the poll worker staffing issues on hand. And then that we would hope any solution to this problem wouldn't add additional costs to counties and any unrealistic administrative requirements.
Federal unfunded mandates? Never heard of that. No, very, very good points. And the political temperature has never been higher. I've seen the end result of political violence having to run from bullets on a baseball field a few years ago. Well, somebody thought they could settle their political differences by coming to address it in a very violent way. We want to see our election workers respected and protected. And part of that process is making sure that we address the issues that could cause potential hiccups, that could cause voter frustrations. And another reason why we're doing this is to make the general public aware that election administrators are doing what they can to provide that worry-free election process that we all hope happens. And I don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats, they want these elections to go off without a hitch. Maybe except for Harris County, Texas in the recent election. But other than that, most, if not all, want a problem-free election day and a problem-free election process. And part of the process, again, is addressing foreseeable problems. And this problem we discussed today is a foreseeable issue that can be solved. Again, here's my prediction, and I hope I'm wrong. I certainly would like, and I'd like your perspective on redistricting. Maybe Mr. Holder and Mr. Elias will end their court cases and we can get lines drawn in states and have them be able to begin to prepare for that primary and also the election. They could come to Illinois if they want to see gerrymandering. Welcome them there. Mr. Holder did not commit when I asked him to come to my home state during a hearing recently. But my prediction is this, that we may run into some paper issues post September 1st. I would bet that the majority, the outgoing majority, in my opinion, here in the House, will have a hearing and demand people get sworn in and ask what is wrong, why can't we get these paper products to election officials. And I will assure you, this problem is not addressed when we are in the majority, and we will have the chairmanship of House Administration. We will continue to have these discussions, and I hope in a very productive manner, to make sure the problems are addressed. So today is the first step in getting to that process. I certainly hope we don't get to a crisis. I certainly hope that the current majority realizes that this is an issue that we need to address in a bipartisan way together before September 1st, rather than after. And I hope my predictions are wrong as to what I think will happen here in the next few weeks, let alone next few months. But let's not make this our last conversation. I would encourage each of you as stakeholders to please stay in contact with our House administration team. If there are any more suggestions that you or your shareholders or stakeholders bring forth that could be of assistance, we want to know. So thank you again, everybody, for being here today. And thank you to the media outlets that are here to really help us bring awareness to the issue. And we hope that we can continue this partnership and working together. So with that, this roundtable is ended, and I don't have any really cool stuff to say about, you can submit stuff for the record later, because, we're not in a hearing tonight. So you can submit whatever you want, and you've got as much time as you want. So with that, we'll end this, and thank you again, everyone. I'm used to 15 hours. I appreciate you coming to tell me.
And then I